Gentlemen, where do we go from here? We just witnessed the assassination of Charlie Kirk immediately following after the brutal murder of Iryna Zarutska, a Ukrainian refugee who is safer in her war-torn country of Ukraine than on US public transit. We're clearly in the middle of a political moment right now, and that matters to you guys per the polling that we've seen. Over 70% of people who get body armor do so because of political reasons. So clearly, you guys see that there's a political upheaval that's likely to occur in our lifetimes, and you want to be prepared in case you get caught in the crossfire. With that said, let's talk about the situation we're in, because we need to plot our course. When a political reckoning occurs, like the assassination of someone like Charlie Kirk, people normally focus on one problem, which is that of political division. And that's something that we can see especially in this case. We see half the country mourning the death of Charlie Kirk, and then a good portion of the other half of the country, not all of them, but a good portion, actually celebrating the death and laughing in our faces. It's the political division and lack of discourse like that that makes people wonder, okay, why is it that we're so separated? And I wonder how good it could be if we could become unified, or we could at least begin to discuss these issues in a less violent way. In short, political violence is blamed on political division, and that division is then blamed on the internet, political pundits, government psyops, and the like, with the assumed solution being that if Republicans and Democrats could come to the center, have discourse, and become more similar, that then we would be better and we wouldn't have so much violence. Here's my position on that. Republicans and Democrats becoming more similar is actually not going to do anything for furthering a more just, more free society, and the reason why is twofold. One is that both sides are moving in the wrong direction. Both sides are abandoning liberty more and more as time goes on, which leads to the second reason, which is at the center, in between them, if they compromise and become more similar, they're still going to be bankrupt as far as a sound political system, because they're going to have still abandoned the Constitution and abandoned the concept of God-given rights and limited government. Those are the essentials of a healthy society when it comes to their politics, and that's been completely abandoned essentially since Woodrow Wilson and the establishment of the progressive era. Let me give you a potent example of this in recent times. In the 2024 presidential election, J.D. Vance and Tim Walz had a vice presidential debate, which many acclaimed as very productive, civil, cordial, etc., especially in comparison to the rest of the cycle. But how did this occur? Why was it so productive when it comes to political discourse? Well, mainly because J.D. Vance abandoned the concept that the government needs to stop spending money, and that the government should be smaller, and that the Democrat agenda that allows for handouts, etc., is not valuable to a free people. J.D. Vance abandoned this idea and essentially embraced an entirely populist agenda, which allowed for, seemingly, not very much difference between the Republican and the Democrat side. But was that good? Well, if you like to abandon the entire basis of the 9th and 10th Amendments, then yes, that's okay. But if you're looking at actually making progress towards making society freer, having a spending competition on the debate floor is probably not the most productive thing. To make another illustration of this point, one that's a little bit broader in scope, we could just look at the Second Amendment. Has the Republican Party, which claims to be in favor of the Second Amendment, actually made much progress in terms of reclaiming our unrestricted right to bear arms? The answer is absolutely not. And the reason why is because every single political advocacy group in the country, as well as every single politician that they help get elected, has an economic incentive to not solve the problem that they campaign on. Because if you solve the problem, then there's no reason to vote for them in the next election cycle. People will move on to some other political advocacy issue. It is because of this incentive problem that life, liberty, and property, essential parts of the framework of a free society, cannot become political playthings. Instead, they have to be built into the Constitution and then ferociously defended. If you lose those rights and they become political playthings, then you're just going to get nowhere, which is why the current political system cannot be fixed from the inside. You have to change it from the outside with a different matrix. More on that in a second. Essentially, the entire voting population of America is motivated by carrots on sticks. God-given rights, which is supposed to be something that both sides support and always protect and don't question, is instead used as a carrot on a stick suspended in front of the Republican voter base, because that's the part of America that is motivated by things like getting your Second Amendment rights back. And then the carrot on the stick for the Democrat voter base is typically free handouts for the intersectionally oppressed or absolution of guilt in the case of white women. And a quick note on that, the sad thing is that the Democrats can actually give their voter base little nibbles of that carrot, because you can always give more free handouts or promise more absolution of guilt to white women. Sadly, in the case of Republicans, we can only hope for the restitution of Second Amendment rights, etc., because once you actually give them that, once you give them the whole potato, why would you give them a potato? Anyways, we're never going to get our rights back if we just keep voting for Republicans. It's not going to work. Like many of you, I mourn the murder of Charlie Kirk very much, but the reason why I do so is less because of his political discourse, which obviously was great and impactful, and more so because he actually understood the importance of God-given rights as the central aspect of how this all comes together, how we have a functioning society. He would always stand by God-given rights, and that's not something that we see in the political system right now. So let's talk about how we ought to respond to the situation. So my thesis is that political violence is caused not primarily from political division, but from the dissolution of our society because of the dissolution of God-given rights. In a future video, we'll talk about why political violence is caused by the loss of rights, but right now let's talk about the action items in response to this political problem, which actually has some contingencies to it, a plan A and a plan B. Plan A is to build local power that helps to protect us from federal intrusions on our God-given rights. Now, a lot of people, we're focused on the national news cycle and on national elections. We're told that those are the most important, when in reality, the local magistrates and local municipalities is where most of the things that affect our lives directly occur. Things like how the local justice system is managed, how sheriffs use their power, how governors and mayors use their power. This is local power that influences our lives way more than we give it credit for. So we need to be able to amass power on the local scale, and that will help to protect our rights even if the federal government gets worse and worse in terms of its violation of the Constitution. Now, how do we build local power? Well, the first step is to build a community, which ultimately, throughout history, has been most stable and most based in God-given rights when it's based in a Christian church. We can see this throughout examples of the Solemn League and Covenant, for instance, in Scotland, which was in the 1600s, then turning to the Mayflower Compact of the Pilgrims of the New World, where people were coming together and saying, this is a social contract under God and before the people here for the preservation of rights and our welfare. If you can build that kind of a community on the local scale, that will be the number one most productive thing you can do politically. The national scale is basically just a distraction at this point. In a future video, we'll discuss Plan A in greater detail, but now let's talk about Plan B, which is what happens if we cannot save the country in time, and if we have to deal with a disaster type situation, particularly when it comes to political unrest. Now, for this, we've built a preparedness matrix, a list of things that you'll need to consider in terms of staying safe in this situation. And that comes in the form of a few different priorities: shelter, water, food, community, health, technology, firearms and ammo, and armor and kit. Our partner, Evergreen Militia on Instagram, actually builds a bunch of content based around these various facets to try and say, okay, if there's a disaster scenario, there's a few priorities in terms of your survival, and they come in this order, such as to be able to keep you and your household safe. It starts with really basic things: shelter, water, food. These are things that you're going to need in order to survive for just a week or a month. But then as it gets down the line, you have things like health and technology, which are really important so as to not get sick or to not get overwhelmed with a lack of lighting or heating, etc. And then at the end of the line, you've got combat-related preparedness issues. Firearms and ammo and armor and kit, these are necessary in order to defend your resources if you have them in the first place. So that is the matrix that we're going to be building on in future videos to say, okay, in a disaster scenario that we hope doesn't happen, but that might occur in our lifetimes, these are the things that we're going to need, and these are the skills that we want to build. In summary, gentlemen, the moderate political position is dead, and right and left are essentially irrelevant political positions. Instead, there are only two parties you need to be concerned about: protecting God-given rights and not. We're concerned with protecting God-given rights, which is why we supply people with tools of liberty. But if we're going to look at the situation as we see it, then we need to have an addressing of the problem and the abandonment of God-given rights, a Plan A in terms of building local power, and a Plan B in terms of disaster preparedness. This is what Armored Republic is all about. Thank you for joining us.